I was 54 when they told me I was the real daughter. Married. 3 kids. The day I returned, before I even saw my aging parents, I overheard a conversation between my younger brother and the woman who'd lived my life. No idea why they're bringing her back. Her and those bastards. She's been out there for decades. Who knows what kind of person she's become? Who she married, what kind of freaks she gave birth to? You're the only sister I've ever had. Bastards? Freaks? You mean my son who became a national sensation at 20? Or my twin daughters, who got into the country's most elite university program before they were even old enough to drive? I was 54 when the police called to tell me my biological parents had finally been found. I froze when I heard it. I'd known I was adopted since my 20s. My adoptive parents told me they found me as a newborn, just days old. At first they tried to locate my family, leaving my information in the National DNA database. But after years of silence they went through the proper channels and made me their daughter, legally and wholeheartedly. Now decades later I was told I'd come from a wealthy, powerful family. But why would a family like that abandon their child? There had to be more to the story. My husband was away on business in Italy. My son was in the middle of his North American tour. So it was my daughters, my 17-year-old twin girls, who took time off school to come with me and meet the people I was related to by blood. Mom. Is this for real? Seriously? They chirped non-stop from the moment we stepped out of the car. All I could hear was Mom this, Mom that, filling my ears like a steady chorus. Fate is funny like that. When my son turned 8, my husband and I decided to try for a second child. Ideally a girl, but we figured another boy would be fine too. Then came the ultrasound. Twins. And with me pushing 40, the pregnancy had me on edge the entire time. I was terrified something would go wrong. And I was even more terrified I'd end up with 3 boys. That's not a family, that's a pack of huskies. But we lucked out. 2 girls. Loud. But sweet. Raising 3 bright, beautiful kids wasn't easy. Took everything I had. But I did it. And they turned out more than fine. When my son was little, his aunt, my husband's sister, a working actress, took him to a film set just for fun. A director spotted him, liked his look, and cast him in a small role. One job led to another, and soon the offers kept coming. My husband and I saw how much he enjoyed it, so we let him run with it. Why not? We figured it'd be good for him to explore different paths, artistic, academic, athletic. Let him grow in every direction. Eventually he picked up more skills. Singing, dancing, acting. These days he does it all. As for the girls, they take after me and their dad. Sharp. Not just good student, smart. Leagues ahead of their peers kind of smart. They've been skipping grades since elementary school. Now both are enrolled in the Elite Scholars Program at one of the country's top universities. Miss Covington, your car is ready. The driver sent by my biological parents. The car? A luxury model, of course. Isla and Zoe have been in plenty of cars in that price range, but even so they were buzzing with excitement, taking in every detail and chattering non-stop. Mom, Isla poked me, you're about to meet your real parents. And they're like crazy rich. Aren't you freaking out? They were kids after all. They'd been buried in schoolwork for weeks. This was their first excuse in a while to get out and have some fun. To them, this Davenport family was just another stop on an adventure. They treated it like we were guests visiting a fancy estate. But from an adult perspective, if they truly cared, if this reunion mattered, they'd have sent more than just a driver. Sebastian had messaged me earlier, asking if I'd arrived at the Davenports. He also sent over a few documents about the family. Background, social ties, media mentions. Classic Sebastian. Tacked onto the end of the message were several photos. Handbags. He wanted to know which ones I didn't like so he could rule them out for the gift he planned to bring back from his trip. Clearly, this whole reunion thing wasn't a big deal for either of us. Maybe if it had happened when I was 20-something, I'd have been emotional. Conflicted even. But I'm 54. The people who raised me, who found me swaddled and helpless, took me in, gave me a name, a home and a life, are gone now. They died never knowing if anyone would come looking for me. They were my real parents. No quotation marks needed. I'd already built another life. Another family. And any weight this return to roots once carried had long since dissolved over the years. The Davenport estate loomed ahead. The car pulled up. My daughters and I stepped out. The man waiting for us was the family's butler. He gave me a look, just a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but said nothing. "This way, Mrs. Davenport," he said. That title made me pause. Just minutes ago the driver had called me Miss Covington. Now I was Mrs. Davenport? Interesting. More curious still was the route we were taking. Not to the main hall where guests were usually received, but down a side path, toward what looked like a secondary wing of the estate. We hadn't even reached the door when voices floated down the hall. "I still don't get why the old man and woman insist on bringing her back. Her and those bastards. She's been out there for decades. God knows what kind of person she turned into, who she married, and what kind of mutant brats she popped out. One sister's more than enough. If word of this gets out, do you know what it'll do to the Davenport name?" The butler coughed, pointed and deliberate. The voices cut off instantly. I was led forward to formally meet the people I was related to by blood. 3 of them waited. David Davenport, my younger brother, 46 this year. I'd seen his photo before, but in person he looked every bit the product of old money. Polished, composed, the face of a man raised to inherit and expand generational wealth. Next to him sat Grace Davenport, the woman who had unknowingly lived the life that was meant to be mine. She was elegant in the way most well-bred society women are, understated but deliberate. Perfect posture, quiet confidence, pearls where pearls belonged. The young woman beside her was probably her daughter, in her early 20s, composed like her mother but with the sharper edges of a newer generation. Grace. That was the name I was meant to have. It wasn't bad, but I'd never been attached to the idea. I didn't miss the name or the life. And none of this was her fault. The blame belonged to someone else, her birth mother. From what I'd been told, she was a close friend of Eleonora, my biological mother, decades ago. Back when Eleonora was happily married and expecting her first daughter, me, her friend's life had crumbled. A bad breakup, a pregnancy, and a family fortune gone. She was desperate to ensure her child still had a way to rise, to belong somewhere powerful. And so, when Grace was born, not long after me, somehow the babies were switched. The details were never clear. What I do know is that this woman took me away with no intention of raising me. I was abandoned almost immediately. And now, all these years later, the truth stood exposed. But what did it change? 54 years had passed. More than half a lifetime. Grace's mother had long since emigrated and passed away a few years back. As I stepped into the room with my daughters beside me, I watched the 3 of them take us in. Their eyes moved over us slowly, and in them I saw it. That unmistakable flicker of surprise. They hadn't done their homework. They expected a plain, bitter woman. Someone worn out by years of obscurity, weighed down by resentment or regret. Instead they found me. Confident. Composed. Flanked by 2 bright, beautiful daughters. Whatever story they told themselves about the sister who vanished into the unknown. I wasn't it. And I didn't need their validation to feel whole. I was proud of the life I'd lived. And I wouldn't trade it for theirs. "Excuse me," I said evenly, breaking the silence as our mutual assessment lingered in the air. "Are Mr. Benjamin Davenport and his wife not here today?" If I was being honest, it was them I wanted to see. My biological parents. Not the siblings I never knew, not the people who'd taken my place or built lives around my absence. Though the siblings had dropped their earlier conversation, they didn't seem too concerned about whether I'd heard any of it. That quiet entitlement, the kind that comes from always assuming you're on the right side of the table. It wasn't new to me. I'd seen it plenty, especially when I was young and just starting out in my career. But these days it's rare. Most people no longer look at me or my children that way. Our parents aren't well. They're still at the recovery facility, but they should be on their way back now. My brother, David, finally said, his tone polite but distant. He looked at me with a kind of practiced formality and added, "I'm David, your biological younger brother." He gestured toward the 2 women next to him. "This is our sister Grace and her daughter Blair." The whole thing felt like a badly cast play where everyone knew their lines but no one believed in the script. For a moment no one moved. Just an awkward 2-second pause stretching out longer than it should have. Then Grace stood. She crossed the room and took my hand in hers. Her voice softened, thick with sympathy. "Sister, you've been through so much." My eyes dropped to her hand, perfectly manicured, wrapped in designer elegance. A diamond ring the size of a quail egg catching the light like it had something to prove. I glanced down at my own hand. My wedding band was simple. No stones. Just a smooth, plain ring that had sat there for over 30 years. No, I hadn't suffered. But the truth behind my past, the strange web of abandonment and substitution, it left a strange feeling in my chest. Not pain, just discomfort. A sense of being misfiled in my own story. This is your aunt and your cousins, Blair. Say hello, Grace prompted her daughter, still holding my hand like we were reenacting some tearful reunion from a soap opera. Blair looked me up and down. Her outfit was flawless. So was her posture. Her expression, however, was carved from solid indifference. Hi, she said flatly. Her eyes never met mine. The arrogance wasn't subtle. Didn't need to be. Her mother might have been the imposter. But Blair? He was the real thing. Born into the name, raised with it, shaped by it. She didn't see me as family. He barely saw me at all. The Davenport family was, without question, one of the wealthiest in the region. Old money, high society, the kind of name that opened doors without knocking. Grace's husband, naturally, came from a lineage just as polished. Perfectly matched on paper and pedigree. Today the family's reins were largely in David's hands. And he made sure to play the part. We'll host a welcome dinner for you tonight, he said, all composure and authority. The butler will show you to your rooms so you can rest for now. But he asked me to stay behind for a moment after the others left the drawing room. He turned to me with what I assumed was meant to be sincerity. Whatever happened in the past, it's behind us now, he said. Grace is a victim too. None of us knew the truth. If Mom and Dad hadn't randomly decided to do full family DNA testing this year, we'd still be in the dark. He explained how, the moment my biological parents found out the girl they raised wasn't theirs by blood, they contacted the authorities and filed a report. Since my DNA had been sitting in the national database for years, the system matched us quickly. Too quickly, really. The whole process was startlingly efficient, almost disturbingly easy, especially when you think about how many families lose children and never see them again. She's been our sister since day one, David went on, talking about Grace. She's a Davenport through and through. She married into the Caldwell family, she's lived that life. It wasn't her fault, this was her birth mother's doing. Their bond clearly was strong. Siblings raised together. Decades of shared history and loyalty. I gave him a small smile and asked gently, you say she's a victim. So tell me, what exactly did she lose? David opened his mouth. Closed it. No answer. I was the one abandoned. I was the one who almost died. That's all I said out loud. But the list ran much longer in my mind. She lived the life meant for me. Wrapped in silk, raised by doting parents, handed opportunities that most people only dream about. She had a family, an identity, a safety net. She took up space in a world that should have been mine. Not by malice, maybe. But fact is fact. For 54 years she lived in the nest that was supposed to be mine. And a lifetime isn't infinite. Plenty of people never make it to 54. Plenty live their entire lives waiting for a truth that never comes. If I had lived a life of suffering, if I had scraped by, unloved, unsupported, what would this truth have been then? A gift? Or a final insult? Even now, with a life I'm proud of, with love and success and children who bring me joy, should that cancel out the harm done to me? Does my survival somehow absolve them of what I was denied? That's the question no one dares ask. And the one they'll never be able to answer. It was early evening when I finally met my biological parents. And the moment I saw them, I understood why David and Grace had looked so stunned when we first met. I looked like her. Even after all these years, even with time having etched fine lines into her face, the resemblance was undeniable. I could see myself, 20 or 30 years from now, in the way her features rested, the curve of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. My daughter, she whispered, her hand trembling as it cupped my cheek. My father stood beside her, taking me in, quiet and searching. We didn't need DNA tests. Our faces were enough. The whole moment felt like something pulled from a film. Soft lighting, emotional tension, a long-lost child returned. I didn't come looking for tears. I didn't think I cared. But still, something in my chest tightened. Something old and unspoken stirred. They were curious, of course they were. Especially Eleonora. Her face, aged and elegant, held a kind of silent hope. The kind that aches. She wanted to believe I'd been raised well. That the woman who took me, her old friend, the one responsible for all of this, had at least given me a good life. That maybe the damage hadn't been so bad. My adoptive parents found me in a rural area outside the city, I said calmly. I was barely alive when they picked me up. The room shifted. I saw it, the flicker across their faces. Realization. Her. Shame. Grace's mother, it was now clear, hadn't stolen me out of love or desperation. She never meant to raise me. She didn't even care if I lived. She'd taken me to remove me from the picture, to clear the path for her daughter. And she almost succeeded. Grace and her daughter weren't present for this conversation. Convenient. I kept my story simple. Brief. Nothing dramatic. Just the broad strokes. Taken in, raised by kind people, studied, worked, married, had children. Nothing flashy. Nothing wild. To them, I imagine it sounded like an ordinary life. But maybe that made it harder. Because even in its simplicity, it was a life I had to claw together from nothing. While Grace had been handed mine like a birthright. They didn't say it out loud. But I could feel it. They hadn't expected their real daughter to turn out like me. Michelle, I know you've had a hard life. Benjamin Davenport, my biological father, finally spoke, voice deep but carefully measured. But this isn't something we can make public. Letting the outside world know would just invite scandal and gossip. He paused, glancing at Eleonora, then back at me. Grace may not be our daughter by blood, but she's been part of this family for decades. She's married into the Caldwell family now, and her birth mother is no longer around. If this story gets out, it could affect both families. Then, as if making a generous offer, he added, what we can do is tell people we felt a special connection to you, call it fate, and say we're taking you in as a goddaughter. We'll bring your children into the family that way too. As for compensation, your mother and I will take care of that privately. How does that sound? I didn't even have time to process the insult before Isla, my daughter, spoke up. If you weren't planning to acknowledge my mom, then why bother dragging her back in the first place? Her tone was sharp, her face a mirror of mine when I'm done being polite. She and Zoe had been whispering about the Davenports all afternoon. Clearly their patience had run out. David's voice cut through the air. Since when do kids interrupt when adults are speaking? Where's your manners? There was. He didn't just disrespect my daughter. He dismissed her. Dismissed me. Zoe didn't take it lightly. You're upset about her manners but not about the fact that your family's being completely unfair? She shot back. My mom's the one who was wronged. And all you people care about is protecting the one who took her place. David's expression twisted, his pride clearly bruised. He stood abruptly, his eyes narrowing at me. Michelle, is this how you've raised your daughters? I met his gaze, calm and steady. Yes. I raised them well. Well enough not to stay silent when their mother's being disrespected. I tilted my head slightly. And you? What gives you the right to correct them? Uncle. I turned to Eleonora and Benjamin. I wasn't raised by my biological parents. And my daughters certainly haven't received an ounce of your care or attention. We came here today as guests. Uninvited ones, it seems. If anything, we're owed courtesy, not lectures masked as authority. One sentence. That's all it took to turn their faces pale, then red, then pale again. Truth, when it lands clean, doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs to be undeniable. David, apologize to your sister. Benjamin's voice cracked like a whip. Being over 40 and getting scolded by your father, especially in front of outsiders, clearly didn't sit well with the heir of the Davenport family. David stiffened, jaw clenched, pride wounded. What did I say that wasn't true? He muttered, his tone icy. None of this is our fault. We're the ones who've been lied to. If she's so full of resentment, why even bother coming back? Why indeed? It was a fair question, just not in the way he meant it. I didn't bother arguing about whether David owed me an apology. I turned my attention instead to the two people still standing across from me, the ones who'd called me daughter, with shaking voices and sentimental expressions not even an hour ago. I'd like to ask, I said, calm and direct, what exactly did you mean by compensation earlier? David's expression shifted instantly. There it was, that look of course. Like he'd been waiting for the moment I'd prove I was just like he assumed. Grasping, bitter, transactional. His contempt wasn't subtle. But Eleonora and Benjamin held their poise. Eleonora reached into her handbag and pulled out 2 cards. Michelle, she said gently, this card has $1 million. It's yours to use however you like. The second is a supplementary card on my account. You can use it freely for daily expenses. And if you'd prefer not to move in with us, we're more than happy to purchase a home for you nearby. You and the girls. $1 million. A black card. Real estate. To the average person, that's life-changing generosity. But one glance at David was enough to see what this meant inside the family. That money? It was chump change. The car they sent to pick me up earlier probably cost more. Compared to what they'd poured into raising Grace. The elite education, the luxury, the influence, the future locked into place from day one. It was laughable. They searched my face for gratitude. Maybe shock. Emotion at the very least. They found none. I smiled politely. Not cold, not mocking. Just honest. I assumed, I said, that compensation meant something closer to what your other children received. For example, equity. A share in the family company. David couldn't sit still any longer. Michelle, don't be greedy, he snapped. You just got back and you're already asking for shares? I raised an eyebrow. Aren't they rightfully mine? From what I've heard, Grace holds 5%. Should I be getting less than her? He turned to our parents, indignant. See? I told you, she came back for the Davenport money. Actually laughed. If you're not worried about the money, then why are you so nervous? I didn't let him finish. Because I knew exactly what was going on behind that flaring temper. I'd done my homework. The Davenport family was still firmly under Benjamin's control. Despite David being positioned as the heir, most of the actual shares hadn't changed hands yet. Grace, though technically part of the company, only held a symbolic position. Her stake was small, enough to show face, not to matter. Benjamin had never truly considered her a successor. Bringing me back complicated things. One more mouth at the table. One more name on the paperwork. Grace had no real standing to protest, not now that the truth was out. But David had everything to lose. And nothing makes people twitch like the idea of slicing a smaller piece of a pie they thought they already owned. Enough, Benjamin finally said. Michelle, keep what we've given you for now. The rest, these things take time. For now, let's focus on the welcome dinner. It was a dismissal disguised as diplomacy. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He left the offer hanging in the air like a gold coin just out of reach, shiny enough to distract, vague enough to avoid commitment. That night's dinner turned out to be a private family meal. Low-key. Intimate. Exactly what you'd expect from people trying to keep a scandal under wraps. No announcement. No press. No toasts to long-lost daughters. They didn't plan to reveal who I was. And they certainly didn't plan to reveal who Grace wasn't. Benjamin and Eleanor were old now. And like all aging parents, they were clinging to the comfort of having their real daughter and granddaughters returned to them at last. The three of us looked polished enough, respectable enough to fit the part. But wanting both sentiment and silence. To reclaim their lost child and keep their perfect family image intact. That was the kind of wishful thinking only the rich could afford. Because you can't have both. You don't get real daughters and clean slates. Not after 54 years. Not without paying the cost. I glanced around the table, taking in the faces of those present. Aside from my biological parents, there were David and his family, his wife and their teenage son, along with Grace and her husband Nathaniel Caldwell, the current head of the Caldwell family. Their daughter Blair sat with them, dressed to perfection, carefully observing everything without saying much. And then there was me with my two daughters, Isla and Zoe, completely at ease. Not the least bit fazed by the tension in the room or the unspoken hostility. That confidence came from their nature, and from the life they'd grown up in. They were used to being surrounded by wealth, by scrutiny, by rooms full of people who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. This was nothing new. The Davenports had made their decision clear. Grace's identity would remain untouched. Partly for appearances, but mostly because of the Caldwells. 2 decades of marriage, 1 child, and countless shared interests bound the families together. Even now, in their 50s, Grace and Nathaniel were more than a couple. They were an institution. Whatever love may or may not have been there in the beginning, the match had been strategic, calculated. The kind of union where names mattered and history was a currency. Revealing that Grace had never been a Davenport would be humiliating for both families. Scandalous. Risky. It would shatter a carefully curated legacy. So, the most convenient path was simple. Preserve the lie. Protect Grace. And quietly slot me into a side role. Acknowledge just enough to soothe guilt but not enough to disturb the power balance. They chose to keep things tidy by pushing the inconvenient truth to the edge of the frame. Me. At 54 I wasn't easy to placate. I didn't have the softness of youth or the blind hope that family would fix everything. I'd lived too much, lost too much, and built too much on my own to be naive. They couldn't sell me fairy tales. Not anymore. The dinner itself was a study in expensive awkwardness. Flawless cuisine, polished silverware, wine that probably cost more than some people's rent. All under the pretense of celebration. It was theater, carefully choreographed, with everyone playing their part. A joyful reunion on the surface. A damage control meeting underneath. David and his wife didn't even pretend to like me. Their son sat next to Blair, thick as thieves, the two of them whispering and exchanging smirks with all the subtlety of teenagers raised on entitlement. They were aligned. Puri. The message was unspoken but clear. I might be blood, but I was not one of them. And they were betting I never would be. As for Grace's identity, truly no longer mattered. Not to her. Not to the Davenports. She knew exactly where she stood. Knew that being exposed as not Benjamin and Eleanora's biological daughter wouldn't cost her a damn thing. Not after 50+ years, not with the Caldwell name behind her, not with a daughter born into power and a husband who still held real influence. So no, my return didn't scare her. It barely registered. And because she didn't feel threatened, they didn't bother pretending to care about me, the so-called real daughter. Michelle, Grace said, voice sweet and polished as ever, I heard you have a husband and a son too. This is such an important moment for your family. Why didn't they come? I paused, fork halfway to my mouth, every eye at the table now suddenly trained on me. They're busy with work, I said evenly. Couldn't get away on short notice. Work. This came from Linda, David's wife. Her tone was all innocence and disbelief. But your son's only 25, right? Already working full-time? He didn't stay in school. That's right, I replied. He graduated early and didn't pursue any further degrees. I wasn't embarrassed by that. Not for a second. But I caught the barely hidden smirk pass between a few of them, that familiar twitch of a lip, the lifted brow. The kind of expression rich people wear when someone else steps out of their script. No need for a young man to go out and grind so early, Linda offered gently. If he's free, why not bring him into the family business? We can find a position for him. That's when Blair spoke. Caldwell's daughter. Grace's polished, well-bred air. Quiet all night until now. Isn't Uncle David's company only recruiting postgraduates these days? David caught her cue. Well, he said, chuckling lightly, some departments still take people without advanced degrees. Not sure if Michelle would be comfortable with those. But hey, if it's tricky, maybe we can slot in her husband too. Always space somewhere. Soft laugh. Two mocking gazes. And every word dipped in that same syrupy condescension. I glanced toward Benjamin and Eleanora, half expecting them to step in with more than just words. But they didn't. They offered a few token scoldings, gentle now, and let's not be rude. Performative. Hollow. The kind of discipline that ends with a wink when no one's looking. I smiled. Controlled. No need, I said, setting down my fork with care. They're doing just fine on their own. I wouldn't want to disrupt their progress by dragging them into places where they're clearly not welcome. After that little exchange about my husband and son, the table quickly moved on, as expected. A shift in topic carefully orchestrated, like flipping the page on a script that was getting too uncomfortable. This time it was Blair's birthday. Of course, the only daughter of the Caldwell family wouldn't be getting just cake and flowers. The celebration would be extravagant, meticulously curated by Blair herself. She already had a guest list filled with influencers and celebrities, but some names, more high-profile, were proving harder to book. She was mid-plea with her parents, her voice just on the edge of a whine when Grace relented with a soft, indulgent smile. All right, sweetheart. I'll see what I can do. Thank you. Please get Reese to come. He's nearly impossible to book. His tour just so happens to hit here around the same time. I've already told my friends he's coming. If he doesn't show, it'll be humiliating. Reese. The name hung in the air like an unexpected chord. Isla Zoe and I exchanged a quick look. Unspoken, subtle, but definitely amused. What were the odds? Nathaniel sat nearby, unbothered by the request, but added in a dry tone, It's fine to follow a celebrity, Blair. Just don't get any ideas about dating one. Dad, Blair rolled her eyes. Lily's the one obsessed with him. You're the one who said I should get close to her. Nathaniel let it drop. He knew where to push and where to back off. His standing in the Davenport family was solid. He was Benjamin's favored son-in-law and he got along well enough with David, likely bonded over boardrooms and bottom lines. Then right on cue, David piped up with exaggerated surprise, like he'd just stumbled onto a juicy secret. Nathaniel. Wait, you're working with Apex Global? Now that name landed even heavier than Reese. I recognized it instantly. So did my daughters. Not exactly working with, Nathaniel replied smoothly. I heard they're sending people over for a round of business meetings in the region. Just trying to open a door or two. Nothing confirmed. It was vague. Too vague. Nathaniel was clearly playing his cards close to the chest, which told me one thing. He had more going on with Apex Global than he was letting on. But no one pressed. Not here. Not tonight. No one was going to call Caldwell out for hedging. David, meanwhile, was still buttering him up. If you land Apex Global, that's huge. Your board's gonna worship you. You'd have the whole room eating out of your hand. Apex Global. Founded a little over 2 decades ago, the company had experienced an explosive period of growth about 10 years back. Scaled fast, went public even faster, and had been rising like a rocket ever since. At the dinner table, Isla and Zoe were trying not to laugh, but under the table I could feel the commotion. One sister furiously stomping on the other's shoe to keep the dam from breaking. If I hadn't been holding back a smile myself, I might have joined them. Then Eleonora chimed in, her tone soft and sweet. Isla, Zoe, would you girls like to transfer to school here? The academic resources in this area are quite strong. Before I could even respond, someone else jumped in. Linda. Mom, the schools here are excellent, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But are you sure the girls could keep up? I mean, if they fall behind or drop in rankings, it might really affect their confidence, don't you think? She looked so concerned, so gracious on the surface. But that concern was as fake as the diamond studs in her ears. Linda didn't want my daughters anywhere near her son. That much was obvious. Not in the classroom. Not in the family. Not even on the same campus. I smiled. Come, Pug. No need, I said lightly. A transfer really wouldn't make sense at this point. Because really, who transfers into middle school after already enrolling in a top-tier university? Linda gave a smug little nod, lips curling ever so slightly. Right. I figured Michelle would be realistic about it. Sure you did. She could keep pretending the only reason she didn't want my daughters nearby was concern over academic fit, but the truth was simpler, cleaner. She didn't want her precious boy brushing up against new money girls with blood ties but no social history. After dinner, Eleonora, with all the unthinking entitlement of someone used to playing hostess and matriarch, arranged accommodations for all of us. She insisted we stay the night like it was natural, expected, familial. Grace's old bedroom had been carefully preserved like a museum piece. Her daughter Blair had her own permanent room in the mansion too. Comfortable. Personalized. As for me and my girls, they cleared out 2 guest rooms at the last minute. To be fair, they offered Isla and Zoe separate rooms. But the girls took one look, traded glances, and made a quiet, unanimous decision. One room was plenty. They had a lot to say. Once the bedroom door shut behind them, it was open season. WhatsApp family group. Detonated. Message after message, meme after meme. Screenshots, inside jokes, live commentary on the facial expressions at dinner, running tallies of passive-aggressive remarks, and a full breakdown of Blair's outfit versus attitude. By the time Sebastian and Reese finished their work for the day and opened the group chat, 300+ unread messages. And not a single one out of place. Sebastian's call came through just as I was settling into the night. How's day 1 of your grand reunion? He asked. Not bad, I said with a small smile, eyes on the dark window pane. Dinner was impressive. On the other end, his voice softened, amused. I saw the group chat. Your daughters sound like they're ready to storm the gates. And you? Not even flinching. They've got more fire than I do, I said, half laughing. He chatted about a few small things, wrapping it up with the kind of words that always made everything feel simple again. Michelle, if you're not happy there, come home. I'll be back in a few days. Hey, I said. It wasn't dramatic, but it grounded me. Not long after we hung up, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Grace standing there in a silk nightgown, soft, expensive, perfectly styled. Her presence radiated calm elegance, the kind that's practiced rather than natural. Can I help you? I asked, leaning against the frame. Grace offered me a practiced smile. Michelle, I was hoping we could talk for a moment. About what? May I come in? I didn't move. Just arched a brow. No need. Whatever you've got to say it here. She didn't push. Didn't flinch. About all of this, she said lightly, gesturing vaguely between us. I know I've technically lived your life, but you have to understand I was just a baby too. None of this was my choice. So blaming me changes nothing. There was the clean-handed claim of innocence. But, she continued, tone smooth, rehearsed. Let's be honest. I'm not leaving the Davenports. I'm not leaving the Caldwells. That's just not realistic. But if I were you, I'd be focusing on the opportunity you do have. The Davenports still carry weight. At your age, Michelle, it makes sense to think about your children's future. Why let pride get in the way of something that could benefit them? They've now seen what this world looks like. Are you really going to let them taste it and then throw them back where they came from? Where they came from? I stared at her. Of all the storms I've weathered in life, this was the first time someone had the audacity to trespass and then talk like she was doing me a favor. A squatter with pearls and a pedigree. She wasn't apologizing. She was issuing a warning, disguised as advice. She was utterly unashamed. After basking in decades of wealth, comfort, and affection that were never meant for her, Grace still had the nerve to stand outside my door with the air of a benefactor, offering kind advice, like it was some precious favor. It wasn't kindness. It was condescension weaponized. What she called opportunity, I called insult. She talked about making the most of what I had, as if I were being handed something extra, not something that should have been mine from the beginning. As if I were the lucky one and she was the generous soul letting me have a taste. The absurdity of it all was almost laughable. What was more absurd was the Davenports' lazy indifference toward me, their so-called real daughter. No background checks, no real curiosity, not even a basic attempt to learn about the life I'd built or the man I married or the children I raised. If they'd cared to look, it wouldn't have been hard. But they didn't. Because they didn't think they needed to. In their eyes, I was a wild card. A footnote. A woman from the outside, brought back in by obligation, not affection. I folded my arms, met Grace's carefully blank expression. Grace, I said, voice low but steady, I don't know what you thought you were achieving by coming here tonight. But let me be clear. Whatever your intentions were, you have no standing to give me advice. Not as a sister. Not as anything. Because no matter how blameless she claimed to be, that didn't obligate me to understand her. I didn't owe her sympathy. And she sure as hell didn't deserve my silence. She said nothing. Just studied me with an expression that barely hid its disdain. Then she turned and walked away, every inch of her posture still soaked in privilege. That wasn't blood. That was leverage. The kind built on image, marriage, and years of being mistaken for someone she wasn't. He could keep it. It never belonged to her anyway. Meanwhile, in the next room, Isla and Zoe whispered and laughed into the night, venting every bit of pent-up sarcasm and frustration they hadn't been able to unleash over dinner. It was close to sunrise before they finally fell asleep. By morning we were gone. No dramatic announcement. No goodbyes. Just a quiet departure. They hadn't expected that. The looks on the Davenports' faces when we told them we'd be leaving. Confused, mildly insulted, vaguely disbelieving. They'd assumed we'd stay. That we'd cling like distant relatives too dazzled by chandeliers and silverware to walk away. They couldn't imagine that someone might choose to leave wealth behind. Especially someone who had once lived without it. But what they didn't understand, what they never took the time to learn, was that we weren't here to beg for a seat. We already had our own table. Michelle, you're really leaving? Grace's voice followed me to the front hall, measured but lined with disapproval. Aren't you going to stay and spend time with Mom and Dad? They came back from the recovery center just to see you. Mom's been depressed for years before finding you. Then came the next line. Sharp and carefully dressed as concern. You can't let your resentment toward me keep you from caring about your real parents. There was the guilt trip. Fully packed and ready to fly. I've got to get back, I said calmly. Isla and Zoe have school and I have work. We all have responsibilities. Just like everyone else. Benjamin finally spoke, brows drawn together, clearly irritated. We just gave you $1 million. What kind of job do you need to go back to? Whatever it is, it can't be earning you anything close to that. Quit. It's unnecessary. Then, as if the plan was already in motion, he added, Isla and Zoe should transfer to a school here. Maybe not the same one as their cousin, but there are plenty of good options in the city. 3 sentences. And just like that, they thought they'd mapped out our lives. I reached into my bag and took out the card I'd been handed the night before. Held it between my fingers. Studied it for a moment. Oh, I said lightly, so this money wasn't compensation. It was the buyout fee for my career. Then I set the card down on the table between us. In that case, I can't accept it. The room stilled. Even the air seemed to pause. Eleonora looked startled, even a little stricken. Michelle, your father didn't mean it like that. It's all right, I said gently. I'm still grateful to you both for giving me life. But too many years have passed. Some things can't be undone, and trying to force them into place just makes it worse. I looked at her, then Benjamin. We all seem to agree that keeping things the way they are is best. So let's just stay that way. We'll be like distant relatives. And sometime, when I have the chance, I'll bring my husband by to visit. I turned to leave. Behind me, Eleonora took a step as if to follow, but her children moved first. David blocked her path. She's just playing hard to get, he scoffed. Acting all high and mighty so you'll beg her to stay. She wants you crawling. Then louder, deliberately cruel. You and Dad don't owe her anything. Outside the Davenport estate, my driver was already waiting. The car wasn't flashy, not the kind that would turn heads in this kind of neighborhood. But it was mine, and that was enough. Truth be told, I didn't mind staying a few more days. I've lived long enough to keep my composure in uncomfortable places. But Isla and Zoe were only 17. And while they had their mother's backbone, they also still carried the softness of youth. The belief that people should mean what they say. They'd known real love. They'd grown up with a grandmother and grandfather who spoiled them in the ways that mattered. Gentleness, loyalty, trust. And because of that, they could spot a fake smile a mile away. The Davenports, for all their carefully practiced civility, hadn't hidden their contempt well. Everyone except David managed a version of polite. But not even gold-plated manners could fully cover what they thought of us. So I took the girls back. Got them settled. Watched them walk into school with the same steady confidence they had when they walked out of it. Then I made a call. My assistant picked up on the second ring. I asked her to give me an update on Apex Global's active projects, and in particular to confirm whether the Caldwell family's company was still among our potential partners. She hesitated for a moment. Then, Madam, is there an issue? Do you want me to move them forward or strike them from the list? Because in this world, that's all it took. A yes or a no. One word from me and entire portfolios shifted. After all, I wasn't just the founder of Apex Global. I was the owner. The controller. The woman they kept trying to read, not realizing they were already in the margins of my story. Start by checking who's handling the contact, I said. I want to know if the protocol's clean. I didn't say no, but she'd worked with me long enough to understand what that meant. Not long after, a full report hit my inbox. And just like that, I'd moved on. The reunion? Done. Something grew from it, fine. If not, we'd keep our distance and call it good manners. But then just a few days later, my phone rang again. My biological mother. She wanted to invite me, us, to Blair's birthday celebration. Insisted I bring the whole family. Sebastian had just gotten back from overseas. He waited for me to hang up, listening with half an ear as I nodded and gave polite answers. Then as soon as the line went dead, he let out a dry laugh. Let me get this straight. They want the biological daughter to show up with her entire family for the birthday party of the adopted daughter's daughter. His tone was more bemused than bitter. Sebastian had seen a lot. He grew up in a stable home, met my adoptive parents in college, and fit into our family like he was always meant to be there. He'd never had to learn how to measure sincerity by the way people used your name. I hadn't made up my mind about attending yet. But my husband and daughters had already made it for me. Sebastian poked at my arm like an overgrown teenager. Michelle, he said, grinning, take me to see the spectacle. I'm your husband, shouldn't I finally meet your blood relatives? I shot him a look. Sebastian and I were born the same year. We met almost 40 years ago, fighting for the top spot on the classroom honor board. Desk mates. Rivals. Then somehow, co-conspirators in life. Back then, it never crossed my mind that the boy I competed with for every point would one day be the man I'd sleep beside for the rest of my life. Now in his 50s, Sebastian still had that same sharpness. No dad bod. No midlife crisis haircut. He looked like time had forgotten to drag him forward, frozen somewhere between 40 and forever. Like one of those actors who never aged, annoyingly photogenic and somehow more charismatic now than he was in his 20s. Of course I knew why. He worked at it. Like everything else in his life, he refused to coast. I reached out and poked his face. Why are you being so nosy? You sound like one of those gossip-hungry interns. Was he really trying to connect with my newly discovered family? No. He just wanted front-row seats to the drama. Our son wants to go too, he added, catching my hand and brushing a kiss across my knuckles like some romantic lead who didn't know we were almost grandparents. I blinked and glanced down at my phone. Sure enough, in the family group chat, Reese had posted a photo of an official-looking invitation. It sent one to him. A proper, embossed, media-ready invitation. Me. I got a phone call. One polite but plain message telling me the date and time. Come on, Sebastian nudged. Let's go. I nudged him back. You're too old to be begging. Have some shame. Then his lips brushed the side of my neck. Light teasing familiar. Babe, he murmured, you don't like it when I beg? The line was so specific, so rehearsed, I almost choked laughing. A few weeks ago, during a dinner with business partners, someone had made the mistake of trying to flatter me by assuming I liked younger men. Without asking, they sent some 20-something baby-faced charmer to my side, trying to pass him off as attentive company. He'd leaned in close, too slick by half, and cooed almost the exact same thing. Babe, you don't like it when people spoil you? He wasn't even half as good-looking as Sebastian used to be, and not a fraction as interesting. Worse, the kid had no idea who he was standing next to. Because that night, Sebastian had come to pick me up. Walked in, tailored and unbothered, eyes calm and sharp. The room shifted when he entered, because unlike that boy, my husband didn't try to impress anyone. He didn't need to. He was proof of one simple truth. A Ferrari, even with age, is still a Ferrari. And the engine still runs just fine. That night, when Sebastian whispered babe over and over in my ear like it was a personal prayer, he didn't let up until I forgot everything I'd planned to say. Now hearing that same word again in broad daylight felt less like a nickname and more like some sort of signal. A button pressed, a game resumed. I tried to push him off me, half laughing, half serious, intending to say something snarky, but didn't quite make it. Sebastian grinned like he'd already won. You're seriously gonna deny a middle-aged man his right to a sex life? He teased, mock-offended. Especially when the loud ones are finally not home? By the loud ones he meant our 3 kids. After the twins were born, Sebastian had voluntarily gotten a vasectomy. Said it with a straight face too. Michelle, I love them, but I'm not trying to roll the dice on a 4th. We're already outnumbered. And yes, despite the chaos, I did end up bringing him and the kids to Blair's birthday party. Held at a countryside estate. Lush, sprawling, straight out of a luxury ad campaign. The kind of place that whispered old money and screamed look at me. Technically it used to be Eleanor's. But word had it Blair had whined sweetly enough that the estate ended up on her birthday gift list. I knew this not because someone told me directly, but because someone, in all their warm familial enthusiasm, had decided to add me to the Davenport family group chat. Yes, that chat. The one where they traded smiley selfies, shared saccharine quotes, and performed affection like it was their second language. A daily feed of blessed to have each other energy. If only they knew how often I scrolled through it with a glass of wine and an arched brow. The front of the estate looked like a luxury dealership. Ferraris, Bentleys, Maybachs, Porsches, name a badge and it was there. It wasn't subtle. But then again, neither was this family. The Davenports hadn't sent a car for us. Maybe it was a deliberate oversight. Maybe not. Didn't matter. I wasn't new to this kind of scene. I'd attended more of these events than I could count, and usually I'd just have the driver bring something understated but presentable. But today, Sebastian got ideas. With a sparkle in his eye like a man preparing for an improv sketch, he headed to the garage and handpicked the most low-profile car we owned. Something that looked like it belonged to a literature professor on sabbatical, not the founder of a global conglomerate. And then, just to complete the bit, he insisted on driving himself. Black sunglasses. Rolled sleeves. One hand on the wheel like he was ready to film a cologne ad. I didn't argue. If the Davenports wanted to believe we were ordinary, Sebastian was very willing to play the part. Hell, he might win an award for it. Sebastian and I had the twins with us, Isla and Zoe, dressed neatly but not showily, the way girls with confidence and taste usually are. Reese was supposed to arrive later. His schedule was packed as always. He'd said he'd join us directly and head home with us after. So it was just the four of us when we pulled up to the estate. And as expected, because this was the Davenports after all, we were stopped at the gate. The security detail was professional, even apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry," the man checking names said, glancing between us and his tablet. "We were instructed not to admit anyone without a physical invitation." His tone wasn't rude, but there was no mistaking the implication. No invite. No entry. I didn't argue. Didn't flash credentials. Didn't name drop. Around us, other guests were being waved in smoothly, suits, gowns, jewelry that screamed old money or desperate to look like it. Some turned to look at us as they passed, curious, mildly amused. People trying to crash parties like this weren't rare. But dragging an entire family along to do it? That was unusual. And if we followed the expected script, I was supposed to call my mother right now. After all, she had invited us. Grace must have suggested it, but Eleonora had made the call herself. So I dialed. 1 ring. 2. 3. Voicemail. I tried again. Still nothing. I exhaled slowly and turned to my family, calm as ever. "All right," I said, brushing non-existent lint off my sleeve. "Looks like we're not wanted that badly. Let's head home." Sebastian arched a brow but didn't protest. The girls? Their expressions said it all. Really? This is how they play it. We turned, took a few steps away from the entrance. That's when we heard it. "Wait. Please, don't go." The voice was rushed, out of breath, urgent. We paused and turned. A man in a dark tailored suit came jogging up the path toward us, clearly in a hurry, and clearly anxious about the optics of what was unfolding. He wasn't security. He was someone higher up. Probably event staff with instructions to avoid PR disasters at all costs. His smile was tight, his eyes wide with apology. "I'm terribly sorry," he said, panting slightly. "There was a communication issue, completely our fault. No one informed the entrance team. Your honored guests. Please, let me escort you in personally." Around us, more guests were arriving, some slowing down just enough to catch a snippet of the commotion. They didn't recognize us. Not yet. But they would. I gave a soft smile but didn't move. "And you are?" The man straightened immediately. "I'm George, the event manager overseeing Miss Caldwell's birthday celebration." "So you're saying," I continued calmly, "that the Caldwell family did in fact invite us. You were aware of it, but due to your team's oversight that information wasn't passed to security at the gate?" He dabbed at the sweat forming on his forehead. "Yes. Entirely our mistake." Zoe, never one to let things slide, tilted her head and smiled with an edge. "Sir, I saw you standing over there earlier. Looked like you were watching everything. You didn't seem in a hurry then." Isla chimed in sweetly. "And now that you're here on behalf of the Caldwell family, does that mean they were the ones who instructed you to make us wait? Or did you take that initiative all on your own?" The questions weren't loud, but the timing was surgical. A few guests slowed down nearby, pretending not to listen but very clearly listening. George visibly paled. His eyes flicked between us and the gathering crowd. Then Sebastian stepped in, casually delivering the final push. "If this is how you treat invited guests, you might want to include a disclaimer on the invite next time. Entry not guaranteed." He gave a tight smile. "Might save everyone the trouble." George looked like he saw his entire career flash before his eyes. "I sincerely apologize," he said, bowing his head slightly. "It was entirely my oversight. The lady of the house gave specific instructions. You were to be welcomed with full courtesy. Please, I beg you, don't let my error reflect on the family." He was groveling, but not in a pathetic way, just enough to show he knew where the power actually sat. It wasn't with the name printed on the gate. It was with the ones everyone was now watching walk through it. Sebastian looked at me, wordless, waiting for my call. I nodded once. "All right. Lead the way." He exhaled quietly in agreement, then reached for my hand. But the moment we stepped through the gate, a sharp voice cut through the buzz behind us. "Covington." I froze. The voice wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. My grip loosened from Sebastian's hand. Then, smoothly, I reached for my daughters instead, taking both their hands as I stepped forward without looking back. "Quick, Light-footed. Purposeful. Behind us, Sebastian was the one intercepted. I didn't even turn around, because whoever it was calling my name, they weren't important enough to slow me down. Let them make the introductions. We were already on the guest list. My phone started buzzing as we made our way in. Dozens of new messages flooding in like warning sirens. Accusations. Complaints. Thinly veiled rebukes. Apparently, me walking away from the gate letting Sebastian deal with the awkward scene outside had offended all the right people. Not that I cared. If they recognized him, chances were they recognized me too. They just chose to pretend otherwise. Fine. Let Sebastian work the crowd. He was better at that part anyway. I, on the other hand, was genuinely curious. Why had they invited me? It certainly wasn't out of guilt or some sudden desire to make amends. Not from the Davenports. Not from Grace. I wasn't delusional. And I didn't have to wait long to figure it out. As I wandered through the crowd with Isla and Zoe by my side, the whispers started. Not loud enough to be called out, but not quiet enough to go unnoticed. From a group of girls dressed in careful layers of designer labels, delicate heels clicking against polished stone. Blair, that's your grandma's adopted daughter? Looks just like Eleonora. Kind of eerie, actually. She's wearing what off the rack? Not a single label I recognize. Why would your grandparents bring someone like that in at their age? Especially when she's practically your mom's age. Weird. Other than resembling your grandma, she's totally average. I heard she and her family almost got turned away at the entrance. Did you guys even invite them, or did they just show up? I swear some people will do anything to latch onto wealth. Maybe she got surgery to look like that. I've seen worse. She's not exactly young anymore, but those two daughters? They're pretty. If they play it right, maybe they'll use this connection to marry up. Classic social climbing. And just like that, it clicked. This was Blair. The birthday girl. The princess of the night, determined to craft an image. The elegant daughter born into legacy, standing by her mother. The poor, wronged woman whose rightful place had been threatened by a stranger from nowhere. And so, what better prop than the real daughter? Bring her in. Dress her down. Keep her quiet. Let the guests compare. Let them see the difference. Let them whisper about it. Let them reaffirm Blair's status by mocking mine. It wasn't even subtle. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a stage. And I'd just been cast in the supporting role of not good enough. But that's where they miscalculated. Because I wasn't here to play their part. And I never needed their script to begin with. Just as we were walking past a marble-columned garden path, a group of boys about my daughter's age strolled by. Leading them was Leo, David's son. My biological nephew. Someone in the group nudged him and asked, loud enough for everyone around to hear. Hey, Leo, are those your new aunt and cousins? Leo didn't even try to be polite. He snorted, visibly irritated, and replied with zero hesitation. I have one aunt. And one cousin. That's it. I'm nearly 55. It's not often I get publicly dismissed by a teenager whose voice probably still cracks when he yells. But here we were. I could have ignored it. I've ignored worse. But my daughters? They weren't raised for silence. Isla glanced around, theatrically confused, then turned to Zoe. Ugh, do you hear that? Sounds like some dog barking. So noisy. Zoe didn't miss a beat. Seriously. Where are the owners? Can't just let a mutt yap at guests like that. The boys froze. Leo turned bright red. Are you calling me a dog? Isla grinned, eyes wide with faux innocence. Well, I didn't say who I was talking about. But if the collar fits. Zoe let out a snort. Damn, never seen anyone volunteer to get insulted before. The entire exchange took less than 10 seconds and it was a direct hit. Leo's face twisted in disbelief. This was clearly a boy who'd grown up cushioned, praised, and deferred to, unfamiliar with anyone calling him out, especially not girls who didn't cower at his surname. You're real proud of yourselves, huh? He snapped. You think you belong here? If it weren't for the Davenports, your family wouldn't even be allowed past the gate. He knew who I was. He knew the truth. But he still said it. Loud. Public. Meant to humiliate. And now just like that we had the crowd's attention. The whisperers turned again. Heads angled. Eyes narrowed. All of them wondering what exactly we were doing here. If we were crashing a party we didn't deserve to be at. But this was where my daughters thrived. Isla's smile widened until it was all teeth. Oh really? Well, joke's on you, Leo. My mom might be able to compete with your dad for the inheritance someday. Zoe followed up, voice syrupy sweet. You seem really stressed about us, Leo. Scared dad won't get to hoard the whole Davenport pie anymore. And there was. I hadn't understood until that moment why they insisted on coming tonight. Why they hadn't flinched once despite the tension. They weren't here to attend Blair's party. They were here to shatter the illusion. The Davenports could claim I was just an adopted daughter. Married with grown kids, no stake in their empire. But now the guests were wondering. What kind of relationship lets someone compete for inheritance? What kind of family drama is being covered up behind the smiles and wine? They tried to write me into the background. But Isla and Zoe just yanked the curtain wide open. The truth was, neither I nor my daughters cared about the Davenport fortune. But that didn't mean they wouldn't use it as ammunition. Stirring the pot, as it turned out, was something of a family trait. Leo was only in middle school. Young, pampered, never challenged. My daughters, on the other hand, were already in college. From day one, Sebastian and I raised them with the same principles we gave their brother. Balance, discipline, edge. They could dance, code, speak 3 languages, and win an argument in 5 seconds flat. And no one their age, or Leo's age especially, could match Isla when it came to comebacks. Just as the situation was starting to heat up, a calm, practiced voice cut through the tension. Aunt Michelle, came the voice of the birthday girl. Blair approached with the poise of someone trained for public appearances. She was flawless from head to toe. Hair, makeup, posture, even the measured concern in her voice. Everything about her screamed Caldwell princess, down to the custom jewelry set that probably cost more than most people's cars. She stopped just close enough to make it look intimate but not too warm. Leo didn't mean what he said, she said smoothly. Please don't take it personally. For my sake, just let it go. Her tone said I'm keeping the peace. Her posture said don't cause a scene at my party. I looked at her. This picture-perfect girl standing in her designer shoes, head slightly tilted, soft smile in place. She was beautiful, polished, and entirely performative. Blair, sensing my silence, tried again. He's spoiled, I know. The whole family's too soft on him. I'll apologize for him, okay? She didn't get to finish. A girl to her left, sharp-featured, thin-lipped, the kind who always smells blood in the water, cut in with a scoff. Why are you apologizing? She said, eyes flicking toward me. Some people don't know their place and then act like they own the room. No manners at all. Lily, don't, Blair said quickly, tone suddenly sharper. But the girl, Lily, wasn't done. She looked me over like I was a product she didn't quite believe was authentic. Seriously, is she really a Davenport goddaughter? Or is she just someone your grandfather couldn't keep in his pants? The words landed like a slap in the crowd. But before the silence could settle, someone whispered nearby. Wait, but doesn't she look like Mrs. Davenport? The implication shifted instantly. It wasn't just that I looked like someone from the family. I looked exactly like Eleanora. And if not Benjamin's, well, there was only one Davenport woman she could resemble like that. Blair's expression faltered. Lily visibly froze. Because suddenly their little narrative, this tidy story about the inconvenient older woman they were trying to rebrand as a fringe relative, started to crack at the seams. I saw the realization flicker across a few guests' faces. The kind of realization that didn't need to be confirmed to be believed. And worse, the kind that couldn't be untold once the seed was planted. If I was Eleanora's secret daughter, what did that make Grace? What did that make Blair? What kind of scandal would that unleash? And just like that, the room dipped into the kind of silence you only get when every single person is thinking the exact same thing. What if the real heiress isn't the one they've been applauding all night? Blair smiled again, the expression calm but brittle. Aunt Michelle, like I said, Leo was out of line. I've already apologized for him. Can we let this go now? But Leo, clearly not a fan of being used as a prop for damage control, snapped before I could respond. I never said sorry. Why should I? She's the one barging in here trying to take things that don't belong to her. He jabbed a finger in my direction, his voice louder now. Loud enough to draw even more attention. And just like that, the temperature in the garden dropped again. Another girl, Lily, standing just behind Blair, narrowed her eyes, her lips curling with barely disguised disdain. Wait. Take things, she repeated. She's not seriously trying to claim something, is she? Her voice dipped. The way people talk when they think they're exposing some ugly family secret. Is she really just a goddaughter, or is she, one of those? Everyone in their social circle knew what those meant. The illegitimate ones. The inconvenient ones. The scandal-buried mistakes of people who were supposed to know better. Blair gave her a smile, tight-lipped, perfectly rehearsed. Of course not. She's my grandparents' goddaughter. Nothing else. But Lily wasn't done. A random woman gets adopted at 50-something and suddenly starts eyeing inheritance? That's embarrassing. Must be broke. She said it with a laugh. Like it was a joke. Like I hadn't heard it all before and worse. Then just as she was about to turn away, she glanced at Blair and shifted the topic without warning, as if I'd already been dismissed. So, Blair, what about Reese? You said he's coming tonight, right? When? Blair's entire demeanor changed. Her annoyance vanished, replaced with sugary anticipation. He's not confirmed yet, but his agent responded, said he'll try to make it tonight. She leaned closer to Lily. You'll finally get a chance to meet him in person. I'll introduce you if you want. Lily's eyes lit up, her earlier hostility already forgotten. She practically squealed. Oh my God, Blair, you're the best. You know how obsessed I am. If I could just talk to him. But I wasn't listening anymore. Because now I remembered exactly who Lily was. The Lily. The girl from the dinner conversation. The one the Caldwell family was interested in building connections with. Smart family. Strong financial background. And apparently very interested in Reese. Which made this all the more hilarious. Because my son, my sharp, beautiful, arrogant son, was notoriously picky. He barely attended commercial events. Spent most of his time split between film sets, live shows, and university lectures. He didn't need brand deals or strategic appearances. He had no interest in playing industry puppet and certainly no interest in matchmaking setups. Especially not with girls like Lily. His fans adored him, especially the younger ones. Isla and Zoe, those two little fire starters, still hadn't calmed down. Now they piped up again, clear, unbothered, and loud enough for the surrounding crowd to catch every word. Yeah, Isla said with a breezy smile. Our mom's that goddaughter, the Davenports had to go through the police to find. Zoe nodded, picking up where her sister left off. She didn't show up begging for anything, they dragged her back. Whole family affair. So that's what this was about. The goddaughter angle. When Benjamin first suggested it, to claim I'd been adopted spiritually rather than acknowledged as the flesh and blood daughter he and Eleonora had lost, I didn't agree. I didn't argue either. I simply didn't care enough to correct them. But my daughters? They'd been listening. And they'd been waiting. Now they were pulling every card off the table and throwing it out into the open no matter how messy it looked. And finally the noise reached the hosts. Grace and Nathaniel made their way over. They weren't hurrying, but their steps had that exact kind of social urgency, the one used by people who just realized a PR issue might be unfolding in their front yard. Grace played her part first, of course. Soft voice. Sympathetic eyes. Nathaniel stood slightly behind her, eyes scanning the crowd, calculating who'd heard what, who was watching, who might report this back to people with influence. When he heard the details, specifically that I was allowing my daughters to speak up like this, his mask cracked. This is not the Davenport estate, he said coldly. No one here is going to tolerate this kind of disruption. If you or your daughters continue behaving this way, I'll have your entire family escorted out. There was the threat. Getting thrown out at a high-profile social event like this? It wouldn't just be embarrassing, it would be remembered. That kind of stain followed you through social circles for years. But I didn't respond. Because while Nathaniel was throwing out warnings, I was looking at the man standing just behind him. One of Apex Global's vice presidents. An executive currently negotiating with the Caldwell family. He recognized me instantly, and the look on his face said it all. His eyes darted toward me. Then, as Nathaniel said the words, "Escort them out," the man took a quiet but deliberate step back. Just enough to suggest he had no idea who I was. Professional survival instincts. He didn't want to be caught on the wrong side of the conversation. Grace jumped in, eager to play mediator. "Nate," she said gently, laying a hand on his arm, "don't overreact. Just let this go. For my parents. Don't embarrass them tonight." Her tone was calming, but her eyes weren't on me. They were on the guest. On the donors. On the clients. And on the growing sense that this party was slipping out of her control. Nathaniel wasn't having it. If the Davenports want to indulge temper tantrums, that's their choice. But this is a Caldwell event. And if there's another outburst, I will have them removed, goddaughter or not. The Isla struck again, louder this time. No fear. No filter. We weren't the ones who started anything, she snapped. People were talking trash behind our backs, and then had the guts to come say it to our faces. That's not class, that's just being desperate for a slap. She narrowed her eyes at Nathaniel. You invited us. Now you want us out because your guests are getting mouthy and can't handle the fallout? That's not etiquette. That's guilt. The crowd around us was frozen, eyes bouncing between us like a tennis match, unsure if they were witnessing a scandal or the start of something much bigger. Nathaniel's expression hardened into something sharp and final. He turned toward the nearby staff and gave the order. Escort them out. A single sentence, escort them out, and I saw it. The flash of satisfaction on too many faces. Leo. Their little circle of trust fund kids. Even Grace, who just moments ago had played the peacemaker, stood still, no longer pretending to intervene. From the second-floor balcony, I caught David and his wife watching everything unfold with matching smirks. Spectators at a public stoning. As for my so-called parents, I didn't even know if they were here. Maybe that was a blessing. I smiled. Not mockery. Not rage. Just calm, measured and final. We're leaving, I said. Isla and Zoe didn't protest. The claws tucked back in, replaced by the same steel I felt tightening in my chest. They huffed in unison and followed. But we hadn't made it far before. Madam, please wait. The voice cut clean across the party chatter, loud enough to hush everything around us. People turned. And there, breaking through the crowd in a flurry of anxious apologies, was Pierce, one of Apex Global's regional VPs. Not just a guest, my subordinate. Madam, he caught up to me breathless, I'm only in town briefly for work. I was invited last minute, had no idea there'd be this. I didn't know they'd. He glanced back and saw Nathaniel and Grace closing in. Before I could speak, Nathaniel's voice rang out, sharp and confused. Pierce, what did you just call her? Pierce blinked, then frowned slightly, like he couldn't understand why Nathaniel was asking such a dumb question. He took a step away from them, clearly and deliberately, and spoke just loud enough for the entire room to hear. Caldwell, this is Michelle Covington, founder and current chair of Apex Global. You're trying to secure a partnership with us, then attempt to throw out our CEO in front of 100 witnesses. The silence that followed was brutal. A pin could have dropped and people 3 rooms away would have heard it. And around us, faces paled. Eyes widened. Drinks lowered. Everyone suddenly realizing they'd been cheering on the public humiliation of a woman who owned the very future half their parents were trying to buy into. Pierce wasn't done. I'm going to take my leave, he said crisply. This is clearly not a venue where our leadership is respected. And as far as that partnership goes. He paused just long enough to let it sink in. Consider it dead. Then he turned to me, tone changing completely. Madam, your car's ready. Shall I walk you out? And just like that, the entire room rearranged its understanding of who Michelle Covington was. No longer the goddaughter. No longer the outsider. No longer the woman they thought they could ignore. I nodded. Let's go. She's the owner of Apex Global? Nathaniel's voice cracked in disbelief. That's not possible. Why not? Pierce replied coolly. She's been at the helm for over 2 decades. The hush in the room was now a dull roar of stunned whispers and recalculations. Grace and Blair looked like someone had just flipped the table of their world and dumped everything onto the floor. Mouths slightly open. Eyes unfocused. Disbelief painted across their carefully curated expressions. And while they stood there scrambling for logic, the sharks in the room smelled blood. But not mine. Madam Covington, what a pleasure. I've followed your work for years, said a sharply dressed man as he offered me his card. If you'd be open to coffee sometime next week. Madam, another chimed in, pushing past a frozen Nathaniel. We're in the middle of a Series B raise and would be honored to have your input. Their voices began to layer over each other. I caught snippets. She's not some white-collar nobody. Why would a woman like that need to be anyone's adopted daughter? Davenport family fumbled hard. I had no interest in sticking around to soak in the irony. My eyes swept the crowd, seeking Sebastian. He'd probably found a glass of wine and a corner to observe the chaos from, quietly amused. Time to go. But before I could move, A new wave of noise rose from the entrance. High heels halted. Glasses paused midair. A few people actually gasped. "It's Reese," someone squealed. "Why is he here?" "The Caldwell family really pulled out all the stops," another murmured. "Reese almost never does private events. He's even better looking in person, my God. That face has to be natural, right?" "Of course it is. We've watched him grow up on camera since he was a kid. He's been a star forever." I watched as the young man who'd just entered paused briefly at the door, eyes sweeping across the room in a deliberate search for something, or someone. But before he could lock onto his target, a crowd had already begun to form around him. Mostly young women. He was young. He'd debuted early. His fan base, overflowing with mom types. I saw them online all the time, moms, who gushed over him like he was their biological child. Just moments ago, several of those young women had been standing behind me. Now they'd pushed past without hesitation, Blair and that girl who'd asked about him earlier included. "Reese. I'm your fan, I'm Lily. I just went to your concert a few days ago." I watched my son as his gaze lingered on the excitable girl. He studied her for a moment, then spoke with polite surprise. "You were the one in the front row wearing the rainbow dress? The one who got shown on the Jumbotron?" Yes, that was me. You remember." Her voice practically trembled with excitement, eyes already glistening. She quickly asked if he'd be willing to take a photo. Technically speaking, he had no obligation to take photos during private events like this. But most celebrities, especially the polished ones, knew how to handle moments like these. Reese glanced around, clearly gauging the atmosphere. The moment felt a bit off, as though the energy had shifted from celebration to spectacle. Then Blair chimed in. "Hi Reese, I'm Blair. I'm the one who sent you the invitation. My friend's a huge fan. She'd be over the moon if you took a photo with her." His gaze shifted to Blair, and I could see the moment he connected the dots, recognizing her not just as the host but as that Blair Caldwell. With the calm poise that came from years in the spotlight, he offered a courteous nod. "Miss Caldwell, happy birthday." Then finally his eyes lifted, past the crowd, past the flashes and noise, and landed squarely on me and his two sisters. Having a celebrity in the family does come with a few small inconveniences. For example, when we're out with Reese or my sister-in-law, we have to go undercover too, hats, masks, the whole 9 yards. Over the years, despite being relatives of a public figure, our personal information has remained largely private. But it's not like no one knows. It's not a secret, just something we don't parade around. Still, under the spotlight of this event, with every eye already drawn toward him, Reese casually called out in my direction. "Mom. When it comes to causing a scene, my son is no less effective than my daughters. He'd been invited tonight with a fee attached, but he didn't take a dime. He simply wanted to come." I had no idea what those three schemed in private, but what I did know was that now, everyone was staring at us again. Their expressions said it all. Who in that direction could a star like Reese be calling Mom? Then the young man, so dazzling he almost didn't look real, began walking. He moved past the crowd, past the whispers and still frozen guests, and came to a gentle stop right in front of me and my daughters. "Mom." That word again, this time face to face, set off a second wave of disbelief. Especially from Lily. Just moments ago she called herself his biggest fan. And she clearly remembered all the things she just said to me in defense of Blair. Her face turned sheet white. Reese seemed to finally notice he wasn't alone. "Mr. Pierce, you're here too?" He used to visit the office with me when he was little. Some of the senior executives still remembered those days. Mr. Pierce smiled. "Just wrapped up the tour, Reese?" Reese nodded. And then, "Grace." She pointed at him, her expression stunned, voice sharp. "He's your son? I thought your son was working some job out there." I nodded, calm as ever. "He is. He works for an entertainment company. He's working." That part wasn't a lie. And just like that, even the couple who'd been quietly spectating from the second floor earlier, David and his wife, made their way down. Now that the crowd knew who I really was, the owner of Apex Global, the reactions shifted from suspicion to disbelief, especially from those who shared my blood. David stepped through the guests and toward the front of the crowd, his usual arrogance noticeably faded. He looked uncomfortable. "You deliberately kept this from us, just waiting to watch us embarrass ourselves?" I tilted my head, amused. "I told you already, I'm not lacking anything. I gave a small shrug. It's not my fault no one believed me. Wasn't it you who assumed I must have been living some tragic, pitiful life? David's lips parted, then closed again. No words. Then, Michelle. Sebastian's voice cut in from behind me. He appeared with several senior executives, all of whom spotted me and walked over with warm greetings. Michelle, it's been too long. And right on cue, the 3 kids beside me, calm and collected as ever, looked toward him and chorused, Dad. With just that one word, Sebastian's identity was laid bare. He wasn't just my husband, he was their father. Then someone in the crowd recognized Isla and Zoe, and his voice carried with that unmistakable tone of pride. These 2 must be your daughters? My son just started college this year, he's actually their classmate. Went to the same middle school too. Not quite in their league though, he got in through the regular admissions track. Your girls made the news when they got accepted, didn't they? The speaker was a well-known businessman himself, one who had recently hosted a grand celebration for his son's acceptance into a top U.S. university. Another guest, half in awe, half in disbelief, asked aloud, Wait, they're already in college? That same executive nodded proudly as if they were his own. Top-tier twins, geniuses. And not long ago Linda, David's wife, was the one who had so smugly suggested my daughters might not be able to keep up at her son's school. Her face had gone absolutely pale. What a masterfully executed social demolition. Sebastian leaned in beside me and quietly asked, What happened? I simply replied, Let's go. We're clearly not welcome here. So we left, our family of 5 calm and unbothered. My subordinates followed as well. And as for the hosts, Nathaniel and his family had no grounds to ask us to stay, not after they'd ordered us out themselves. But the damage was done. Caldwell's little coming-of-age spectacle had turned into a public disaster. In elite circles there's no such thing as a well-kept secret. The gossip started to spread, first in whispers then in waves. My resemblance to Eleanora was too obvious. And Grace? Not so much. Her features bore little to no trace of the Davenport couple. Ironically, the very people trying to smear my reputation ended up doing me a favor. They publicly shared how I refused the compensation, a measly $1 million, offered by Eleanora. Before the truth came out, most assumed that adopted daughter was just another gold digger. Afterward, they laughed. $1 million? That doesn't even cover what their kids spend at auctions. Calling that a reparation for your biological daughter? What a joke. Funniest part? She didn't even want the money. If I had a daughter like that, successful husband, brilliant kids, I'd have her on a pedestal. But not the Davenports. They act like she's here to rob them. So Grace really isn't their daughter? Took someone else's life for over 50 years? If I were the real one, I'd be disgusted just looking at her. What's even dumber is, if they had found her earlier or hadn't swapped the kids at all, the Caldwell marriage would have been to her. Imagine the Apex Global CEO as your in-law. They wouldn't have to beg for partnerships now. Partnership? Please. No one from Apex even bothers to acknowledge them anymore. And as for Lily, she completely cut ties with Blair after the party. She'd realized far too late that she had been used. Pointed like a weapon at the mother and sisters of her favorite celebrity crush. And worst of all, the ones who looked the most foolish were the Davenports and the Caldwells themselves. Their pride, their prejudice, and their desperate need to protect appearances had turned them into the latest punchline in high society. The whispers, the gossip, the social fallout, it all eventually reached me and Sebastian, of course. But to be honest, we barely noticed, because our weekend was filled with a far louder soundtrack. Mom, mom, mom. Dad, dad, dad. All from 3 grown, chaotic, utterly unrepentant children. It was the weekend and for once all 5 of us were off. No school, no shoots, no meetings. And when 3 adult-sized humans are bouncing around your house yelling over each other for your attention, you start considering drastic solutions. Like Sebastian turning to me and saying, "We could book a hotel room, just for the silence." God, we'd aged into that kind of old couple, dreaming of peace and privacy in a 5-star suite 30 minutes from our own house. But no, our kids were clingy, funny, annoyingly lovable, and this chaos was ours. Meanwhile, the Davenports had been trying to get in touch with me relentlessly. Now that the world knew who I was, finding out who Sebastian was had been easy for them. After all, when I met him he was already wealthy. And what he'd built in the last 2 decades only made the contrast between us and the Davenports that much more stark. Funny, isn't it? They were so intent on me playing the adopted daughter. But no. They just sat back and said nothing as rumors swirled that Grace was a fraud. Now they wanted a meeting. A formal apology, they said. From the younger generation, who had spoken out of line. But let's be honest. Were they really the only ones who'd crossed the line? Where do you think those kids learned to sneer and spit venom? It wasn't just their own invention. They had role models. So I agreed to meet. Out of curiosity. Out of closure. And this time I didn't go alone. Sebastian came with me. No kids. Just husband and wife. 2 people who'd built a life no one in that family had ever expected. I listened to Blair and Leo's apologies, each delivered with all the theatrical sincerity of an actor in a high school play. My expression didn't shift. Yes, the younger generation had clearly never learned how to show basic respect. But who was really responsible for that? They didn't come out of the womb sneering. Still, the tone of the whole Davenport family had changed. Gone was the veiled contempt, the patronizing glances. They were polite now. Respectful even. And then Benjamin, my biological father, finally brought up what they should have said from the beginning. Shares. Of course he did. Because now they knew. I had no need to covet the Davenport family business. I had Apex Global. I had Sebastian. I had the power to destroy them or elevate them with a single word. Giving me a portion of their company wasn't some noble gesture. It was a strategic alliance. One that let them maintain face and buy a lifeline into the right circles. David, for once, kept his mouth shut. He knew the truth. The empire they'd built him into couldn't match what I'd built from scratch. Let's be honest. If I'd been raised as the rightful daughter of this family, there wouldn't be a question about inheritance. David wouldn't even be in the running. That reality clearly stung. And then Benjamin had the nerve to say, "Michelle, I know you must still have resentment. It was our failure as parents that left you adrift for so many years. You don't like Grace and we understand that. But she's innocent in all this too." Innocent. Right. Eleonora followed up immediately, almost as if they'd rehearsed. "Yes, Michelle. You have to understand us. Both the palm and the back of the hand are made of flesh. Grace may not be blood, but she's our daughter too. Of course she is. They raised her. Spoiled her. Watched her flourish using a life that should have been mine. And now they wanted me to understand. To empathize. To let them keep both daughters, both legacies, both faces without ever paying the true price for what they took. Because at the end of the day, they still couldn't let go of the daughter they bought with my life." As soon as Sebastian began speaking, his tone was calm, almost professional. "I have some documents here. You might want to take a look before we continue." He handed over a folder. Benjamin took it and opened it with the mild curiosity of someone who thought they'd seen it all. He hadn't. Sebastian waited until they were holding the contents in their hands, then continued. "I came across this information by chance. What you're holding are select records of Grace's bank transactions. According to these, she began sending money to a certain account from the age of 18. A few years later, around the time she married, she switched to an overseas account. The recipient? A woman named Hannah Smith." He paused, then added, "That is Grace's biological mother. The transfers went on for over 30 years. Stopped only recently." The silence in the room was almost physical. Grace's face froze. Her husband looked blindsided. Her daughter equally stunned. But the real impact landed on Benjamin and Eleonora. They were staring down at the pages in their hands like the paper might catch fire. 30 years of deception. Sebastian concluded without raising his voice. "So I think it's fair to say your adopted daughter may have known the truth all along. Since she was 18 at the latest. She didn't tell you. Instead, she funneled money to her real mother for 3 decades. Grace shot to her feet, her composure cracking. "That's slander. You're lying. You two are conspiring to ruin me." Her voice was sharp, brittle. But I just looked at her, and then at the 2 people who'd once called her daughter, with the same calm I'd carried from the beginning. "If you believe we forged the documents, you're free to investigate. Have your people verify every detail. If I've lied, I'll apologize publicly." Then I tilted my head, my voice soft but cutting. "But if I haven't lied, when you found out I was alive, what was the first thing you felt, Grace? Was it guilt? Or was it anger that your mother failed her job? That she couldn't even kill a baby properly. Grace's lips trembled. You. But she couldn't finish her sentence. Because she saw what I saw. Doubt. In the eyes of the people who raised her. It shattered her. She turned to them, eyes wet, whispering like a child caught red-handed. That, Mom, you don't believe this, do you? These are fake. They have to be. I didn't stay to watch the rest of her show. I didn't need to. Whether they believed her or not wasn't my concern anymore. I stood up. Sebastian stood with me. Without another word we left. Under the weight of undeniable evidence, even the most convincing performance collapses into dust. Once the idea takes root, that the girl they raised might not be their own, finding me would have been easy. My records had always been accessible. Benjamin and Eleonora, the two remaining decision-makers in the Davenport family, admitted, if they'd brought me home at 18, our relationship might have been salvageable. They weren't wrong. If I'd still been a teenager, they might have willingly poured time and money into cultivating a bond, especially emotional ones. But at that time I still had my adoptive parents. I would never have left them. When confronted, Grace eventually stopped denying it. She cried, oh how she cried, and described in detail how her birth mother had told her the truth when she was 18. That the real Davenport daughter had supposedly died. That she was afraid. Afraid to lose the life she'd lived. Afraid to be rejected, so she said nothing. Her excuse. She was blackmailed into sending money all these years. But what difference did it make? She kept that secret for 36 years. And once the lie cracked, everything else crumbled too. Grace's status in the Davenport family turned awkward. Her daughter, once proud, now had to live with the shame of her mother's choices. And then came the next blow. Nathaniel had a mistress. And children. Yes, plural. Grace's beloved only daughter was no longer the only one. Not even the only daughter. When the Davenports had her back, the Caldwells tolerated everything. But now they tested boundaries. Grace could not afford to lose her place as Mrs. Caldwell. There were fights but never real rage, because she had no leverage anymore. Nathaniel, unsurprisingly, despised a wife with no true name or status. And he blamed her for the string of failed business deals. When drunk, I heard he once rambled bitterly that his wife should have been a powerhouse. A queen in heels, a boardroom shark. How ironic. Because any woman with real power would have destroyed a cheating husband for less. As for the Davenport side, they started calling. Messaging. Trying to rebuild something, anything. But what's lost is lost. The first impressions they left were carved deep, and I saw no need to pretend we could turn that around. Not now. David, bless him, finally remembered that I was his full-blooded sister. Tried to use it. He hoped Apex Global might extend a helping hand. Open a door. Offer a deal. Hilarious. He must have mistaken Sebastian and me for idiots. Davenport Incorporated was already floundering. Decline was inevitable, unless someone with real market sense stepped in. But David was never that person. Eventually we left that city. We still had property there but no reason to stay. The whole reunion thing? Done. Our son returned to the chaos of showbiz. Our daughters went back to their studies. Sebastian and I still had fire in our blood. So we worked, built, grew. Conveniently, a meme was going viral online. 50-something? That's peak hustle age. Our daughters, ever online, sent it to the family group chat. Motivation for our badass parents plus workaholic aunt. To which their aunt promptly replied in the middle of the night. Please. Sup. Y'all are exhausting me. Extra story, high school years. I had this classmate. Top grades, a bit spoiled. A boy, good-looking with beautiful handwriting that teachers praised more than the actual answers. But I didn't like him much. He was popular. Too popular. Sometimes I'd just step out to use the restroom, and by the time I returned, one of his friends would be comfortably sitting in my seat chatting with him like they owned the row. At some point he must have noticed my growing irritation. After that, whenever his friends came around, he'd just stand up and leave with them to talk elsewhere. Another thing, his grades. Every time my name came right below his on the ranking board, I'd grit my teeth and silently vow, next time I'm beating him. His being number one feels amazing. After one particularly painful second-place finish, I was staring at my wrong answers in deep self-reflection when Sebastian, that same annoyingly perfect desk mate, leaned over and said, Michelle, I can walk you through this one if you want. He was challenging me. Finally, I got first place. I casually glanced at his paper, smug and triumphant, and fired back. Need me to explain anything this time? He looked at me, completely sincere, and said, "Thanks." According to Sebastian's own recollection, he thought we were kindred spirits back then. Mutual respect. Academic rivals. Maybe even friends. In reality, I'd go home and vent like a volcano to my parents. My desk mate is constantly trying to provoke me. My mom sighed. My dad muttered under his breath. Let him stay oblivious. Keeps her from dating too early.